Welcome in, everyone, to Lively Lewis Stories.
That's right. We're back with even more awesome adventures with Levi and Ivy.
Set your storytime meter to fun and get ready to join the Lively Lewis crew.
All you need is your imagination and...
Off we go! I can't wait to see where our story takes us today.
Have you ever wanted to get more Lively Lewis in your life?
Well, we've got you covered.
Grab an adult and zoom over to livelylewisshop.com.
Or just click on the link in our show notes.
Enough about that. Let's get to today's super Lively Lewis story.
As they walked to school, Levi dragged his feet, while Ivy held up her new magnifying glass and counted the cars as they passed by. 15, 16, 17, she counted as they both trudged down the sidewalk. School has been so boring lately, said Levi as he swung his backpack back and forth. I know, replied Ivy, but I have a feeling today will be special. As Ivy walked along, she looked at everything through the lens of her new magnifying glass, leaves, pebbles, and even her neighbor's cat until it ran off. I think today is going to be fun because I'm going to make it fun, said Ivy. That's why I brought my new detective kit with me to school today. There'll be no way fun can hide from me because I'll be on the lookout for it. Levi smiled at his sister. He liked her enthusiasm. He couldn't help but say, I just don't think that's how detective kits work, though, Ivy. They're used for locating lost stuff and solving mysteries, not finding fun. Just trust me, she replied. Detective Ivy is on the case of the missing school fun, and I'm feeling like today is going to be a day we'll never forget. As they walked up the stairs into their school, Levi, now dragging his backpack on the ground behind him, Ivy shouted, What's that? Holding up her magnifying glass, she ran over to a flyer that was taped to the wall in the hallway. This could be a clue to something super fun happening at school today, said Ivy with a big smile. However, as Levi read the poster out loud over her shoulder, she quickly realized she had to keep looking. Please remember, hallways are always for walking, not for running. Thank you, Miss Binder, school principal, said Levi. Wow, fun message. Looks like I have to keep looking, said Ivy confidently, very determined to find something fun going on. Levi and Ivy continued down the hallway, Ivy looking for fun clues all the way. As they reached their classroom, Ivy noticed something written on the chalkboard. Now that looks like fun, said Ivy as she read the message out loud. Super fun science day today. Levi's eyes opened wide because he and Ivy both really liked their science teacher, Mr. Smith. But science work was still work, and how much fun could that really be? Well, Levi and Ivy were about to find out. Look at that, said Ivy, holding up her magnifying glass. It's got the word fun right there in the title. Case solved. We'll see about that, muttered Levi as he took his seat. Levi, Ivy, and the rest of their class sat patiently and waited for Mr. Smith to enter the classroom. 1 minute passed, and then another, and another. Then all of a sudden, from under the big desk in the front of the room, they heard a rumbling. A loud rumbling that got louder and louder. What's going on? Asked Levi to Ivy. You're a detective. Figure this out. The rest of the class looked around as they started getting up from their desks and heading toward the door. But Ivy wanted to stay. Levi, being a good big brother and not wanting to leave his sister alone in the classroom, stayed by her side. But as the rumbling under the desk got even louder, he thought it would be best if Ivy continued her investigation in the hallway. Hey, Ivy, I think we can leave now. Maybe you find some clues about this rumbling desk outside the classroom, pleaded Levi. No way! All the clues we need are right here in this room. I can feel it, answered Ivy. We just need to look for them. With her magnifying glass in hand, Ivy slowly walked toward the big desk in front of the room. Levi grabbed her detective bag that was sitting on her desk and followed along. If they were going to solve this mystery, then it was best to be as prepared as possible. Levi stood behind Ivy as she peered over the edge of the desk to see who or what was underneath and where that loud rumbling noise was coming from. What they saw next was a bit more than a little strange. Mr. Smith? Exclaimed Ivy as she grabbed Levi to take a look at what she was seeing. Levi squeezed his eyes shut, not knowing what he was going to see, but if Ivy needed him, he would be there for her. So as she pulled him around to the back of the desk, he opened his eyes to see Mr. Smith. But he looked a tiny bit different. Mr. Smith, you're tiny, Levi blurted out over the rumbling noise as he looked at his teacher through Ivy's magnifying glass. Like super duper teeny tiny. What happened? Levi and Ivy said at the same time, hoping Mr. Smith had some kind of reasonable explanation. But before they could get their answers, something just as strange happened. The rumbling sound got louder and louder, and Levi and Ivy couldn't hear Mr. Smith's very tiny voice telling them over and over a very important message. Leave the classroom, Mr. Smith shouted as loud as he could, but it didn't matter. The rumbling sound was just so loud now, and Levi and Ivy were so interested in finding out what was going on and how to help their teacher that they couldn't even think of leaving. Then, before they knew what was happening, the rumbling noise got so loud that Levi and Ivy had to cover their ears. They closed their eyes, and in a big, bright flash of light, the rumbling noise suddenly stopped. Thinking everything was over and maybe back to normal, they opened their eyes to find Mr. Smith standing right next to them. "Oh, great!" exclaimed Levi, sounding very relieved. "You're not teeny tiny anymore. Now, can we get down to the bottom of what we just saw?" added Ivy, holding up her magnifying glass. They were both so out of sorts from everything that had just happened that they didn't see what was really going on. That's when Mr. Smith finally got to speak. "Hi, Levi and Ivy," he began. "I have something to tell you, but promise me you won't get nervous." "What's there to be nervous about?" asked Levi. "You're not the size of an ant anymore, and now you can tell us how that happened in the first place." "Yeah, I bet it's the coolest story," added Ivy. "I'm just so glad that I had my magnifying glass with me today, or I don't think I would have ever seen you behind the desk." "Yes, it is certainly lucky you had that with you today. But not everything is back to normal," said Mr. Smith. "Just look around. I'm not back to my normal height." "What do you mean, Mr. Smith? You look completely normal to us," said Levi. "We're not teeny tiny." "Well," Mr. Smith went on, "you actually are. Please just take a look around." It was then Levi and Ivy finally stopped for a moment and took a look at their situation. Mr. Smith was telling the truth. Levi and Ivy were teeny, just like Mr. Smith, and now had an even bigger case to solve. The case of the shrinking students and the tiny teacher. "What are we going to do?" yelled Levi. "Are we going to be tiny forever? Will I have to go to a school for bugs? Do you think we'll get big again by recess?" "I see you're asking all the really important questions," said Ivy to Levi as she rolled her eyes. "We need to focus on getting some real answers to solve this case," said Ivy. "Mr. Smith, how did this all happen and how do we fix it? You're a science teacher. You must have a scientific explanation for all of this." "I do," said Mr. Smith, taking a seat on a cookie crumb that was sitting next to him on the floor. "It's all my fault." And as he said that, he began to look a bit nervous. "Yep, it's my fault, and I'm not sure how we're going to get back to our normal sizes right this minute," said Mr. Smith. "But we are all scientists here, and if we work together, I'm sure we can come up with something. Well, at least I'm pretty sure." Levi and Ivy were stunned. How could this be Mr. Smith's fault? So they asked him. "Well, as you can see on the board, it says today was going to be super fun science day," started Mr. Smith. "That's because I had a plan to take you all on a trip to the wonderful world of bugs. But not just through the reading in your books or a video online. We were actually going to join the bugs in their teeny tiny world." Levi and Ivy looked even more shocked. Not knowing what to expect next, Mr. Smith then went on to tell them that he had been working on a shrink ray for years, thinking how cool it would be to shrink down and explore all the super tiny worlds firsthand. He had tested it on a few things around his house, an orange, a plant, and even his favorite reading chair. They had all shrunk, and then they all unshrunk with no problem at all. Mr. Smith was so excited to show his students, thinking this type of invention would definitely change the way science was taught in school forever. So before his students got to class that morning, Mr. Smith hid the shrink ray under his desk so he could make a big grand reveal to all of them in class. Then when he heard the first few students walking down the hallway, he got very excited and ran to grab something from his bag. While doing that, however, Mr. Smith tripped over the shrink ray on the ground, turning it on and shrinking himself before his students walked in. "That's why I'm teeny tiny, and you are too. I guess the shrink ray still had a little more power left in it when you found me. I'm sorry," said Mr. Smith. "I immediately tried to return to my normal size once I shrunk, but it didn't work. Maybe I tested a few too many times. Maybe all those tests were the reason it stopped working properly this morning, but whatever broke the shrink ray needs to be fixed, and fixed fast." Levi and Ivy were silent for a moment and then thought, This was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and they should enjoy it. They were also really confident that with Mr. Smith there to help them, they would all be back to their normal sizes, sooner rather than later. "Don't worry, Mr. Smith," said Ivy. "Let's work together, like you said, and figure out a way out of the situation. I know we can do it." At this point, they were so tiny that when their class came back into the classroom, they couldn't see them at all, let alone hearing them all calling out for help. All the students headed to their next class wondering all the time where Mr. Smith, Levi, and Ivy had gone. While the search continued for their teacher and their classmates, Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith knew what they had to do. They started out by looking at the shrink ray, which thankfully had shrunk down with them. Mr. Smith then explained how there was a reverse button on the ray, but that when he tried to use it to unshrink himself, that's when the loud rumbling happened. "We need to figure out what's wrong with the reverse button. Then we'll be able to unshrink ourselves," said Mr. Smith. Ivy was so happy she had brought her detective kit to school that day and immediately started looking at the shrink ray for clues. As Ivy and Levi looked at the strange piece of equipment, they asked Mr. Smith a bit more about how he made it. He then explained to them that he used lots of old pieces from video game systems. "Oh, our friend Leo knows everything about fixing video game systems," said Levi. "I bet he could fix the shrink ray." "That's right, Leo is great at taking apart things and putting them back together," said Mr. Smith. "It's worth letting him take a look at it." "But how?" That's when Ivy spied a piece of crayon on the floor underneath the desk. "Maybe we can write him a note," said Ivy. "I know he has math in this classroom next. We'll just slide the note along the floor, get his attention somehow, and when he reads it, he can help us." Any idea sounded like a good idea to them at that point, so they used all their strength and wrote Leo a note. It said, "Leo, don't freak out, but we got shrunk by a shrink ray that Mr. Smith made. We're under the big desk in the front of the classroom. Please come see us after class. We need your help to fix the shrink ray so we can unshrink ourselves. It's made out of old video game system parts, and there's no one better at fixing video game systems than you. Thank you, Levi and Ivy." "I figured giving him a compliment at the end couldn't hurt," said Levi with a smile. Then all they had to do was wait until Leo sat down at his desk for math class. Once he arrived in class and settled in, Levi and Ivy pushed the note across the floor to Leo's desk. Then, to make him look down, Ivy climbed up on his shoe and tickled his ankle with a scrap of paper she found on the floor. And it worked. Leo looked down, noticed the note with his name written on it in green crayon, picked it up and read it. And you can imagine his face as he took in all the information. Then, when he saw Levi and Ivy by his shoe, he could barely contain himself. They waved hello and scurried back under the big desk at the front of the classroom, hoping Leo could help them after class was over. Then, as Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith waited, they couldn't help but hope their plan would work. Math seemed to last forever that day, but when it was finally over, Leo waited for everyone to leave and then ran right over to the big desk at the front of the classroom. That's when he saw teeny tiny Mr. Smith, Levi, and Ivy all waving at him with big smiles on their faces. They were ready to not be so small anymore and were really hoping he could help. "Wow," said Leo over and over and over again, not believing what he was seeing. "Wow, wow, wow." After Levi and Ivy were able to calm Leo down, they quickly filled him in on the whole situation. What Leo said first made Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith jump for joy. But what he said after that surprised them all. "I'll help you for sure," answered Leo quickly. "Yay! Thank you so much!" exclaimed Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith all together. "But only $20, added Leo, which quickly stopped their excited yelling. "There's a new video game I really want to buy, and I just need $20 more to get it. So what do you say? Once I see the money, I'll fix your shrinky ray thingy." Leo had to run or he'd be late for gym and told Mr. Smith, Levi, and Ivy he'd be back before lunch in just a couple of hours. Hoping Mr. Smith had the money on him, Levi and Ivy both turned to him with wide eyes. But sadly for them, he didn't have any cash on him. "Where are we going to get $20? said Ivy, sounding worried for the first time that day. "I can't believe Leo wants us to pay him," said Mr. Smith, sounding very surprised. "Remind me when all of this is over to assign Leo some extra hard homework next week." Then, as they all sat thinking of what they could do next, they heard a tiny voice from behind. And as if their day couldn't get any stranger, when Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith turned around, they found themselves face to face with a little bumblebee. A little talking bumblebee. "Hi, I couldn't help but overhear what you were saying," said the little bumblebee. "If you need to make some money, I have some friends that could use a little help with a few chores." Normally, Mr. Smith, Levi, and Ivy would not have been able to believe what was going on. A talking bumblebee? But today, anything seemed possible. So they said hello to the little yellow and black fuzzy flyer and asked what they could do to make some money. "Great to meet you, by the way. My name is Floyd," said the bumblebee. "If you follow me out to the school garden, I'll introduce you to some friends of mine." "That sounds great," said Ivy. "Thanks so much." "We're so glad you overheard us," said Levi. "As fun as it is to be little like you, we're kind of used to being our normal sizes." They all walked toward the window, which was the quickest way to get to the school garden, but quickly realized something. Walking out to the garden was going to take a long time. A really long time, since they were so teeny tiny. Since they needed to be back in the classroom in just a couple of hours to meet up with Leo, they needed to figure out a way to get to the garden a lot quicker. That's when Floyd asked if he could fly them out there one by one. They all couldn't say yes fast enough, and one by one were whisked away out the classroom window. "Wow, Mr. Smith," said Ivy once they got out to the school garden. "This is the best science lesson about bugs ever in the history of school." "Totally," added Levi. "Science is for sure my new favorite subject. If every day could be like this, of course." "I'm glad you're enjoying it, kids, but let's not lose sight of what we need to do. Unshrink ourselves," said Mr. Smith. Floyd nodded his head and called over to one of his friends who he thought would be up for paying Levi and Ivy and Mr. Smith a bit of money to help her with some chores. She was a sweet little ladybug who wobbled over and stopped right in front of the three tiny travelers. "This is my friend Lily. She's always looking for help with her house chores," said Floyd. "That's right," replied Lily. "I'd be happy to pay you if you can help sweep out my tiny nest, clear some fallen leaves out of my yard, and help put up a little fence around my garden." Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith happily accepted the jobs and got right to work. After Lily paid them, Floyd introduced them to Wiggle, his yellow and blue caterpillar friend who needed some help at the Caterpillar Cafe. Wiggle was happy to help Levi and Ivy and Mr. Smith when once he heard why they needed the money. Then after a little while of cleaning some tables and prepping some tasty berries and leaves for the lunch rush, the three teeny tiny travelers were off to find another job. "This will likely be the last job we can help with," said Mr. Smith. "We need to get back to the classroom in just a bit to meet back up with Leo." "Gosh, it sure is hot out here in the garden," said Ivy. "After all that work, I could use something cold to drink." Hearing Ivy say that gave Levi an idea. "How about we open up a lemonade stand?" suggested Levi. "It would be a good way to make the last bit of money we need, and we can have a tasty cold drink too." "Great idea," said Mr. Smith. "There are lemons right here in the garden, and if Floyd can spare some honey to sweeten our mix, we'll be all set." They all agreed to creating a fun lemonade stand, and in just a short time, they had collected the last bit of money that they needed from some very thirsty insect friends. "That was the best lemonade I've ever had," said Ivy, taking one last sip from her teeny tiny cup. "It was Floyd's honey that made it so good for sure," added Levi. "We can't thank you enough, Floyd," says Mr. Smith, "for the sweet honey and for all your help today." "It was my pleasure to help," replied Floyd. "I hope everything works out, and the next time I see you, you won't be quite so small." Floyd then flew Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith one by one back to the classroom, said goodbye one last time, and flew back to the school garden, hoping to see his friends again soon. Once back in the classroom, Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith walked quickly back to the big desk at the front of the room and waited patiently for Leo to return. In no time at all, he walked back in the classroom just like he had promised. It was lunchtime, so he would have only 25 minutes to fix what was wrong with the shrink ray before he had to run off to computer class. "So, did you get the $20? asked Leo with a smile on his face. "We sure did," answered Levi, holding up 20 very tiny $1 bills. Leo had grabbed a magnifying glass when he walked into the classroom so he could see everything a bit better and held it up to the money. "No way!" exclaimed Leo. "You really did it. I was just joking. Just playing a prank. You don't have to pay me anything. I'm happy to help you because I can and because it's the right thing to do." Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith just stood there stunned and very happy that Leo really wanted to help them out of the kindness of his heart. But since they had such a wonderful time making the money and meeting all the wonderful bugs in the school garden, they weren't mad at Leo's little prank. They thanked Leo over and over and over again and let him get to work on fixing the shrink ray. Using a magnifying glass he had and some very pointy tweezers, Leo spotted the problem quickly and got right to work. It was a loose wire that needed to be reconnected. "This happened to my video game system just last week," said Leo as he worked. "It would turn on, but it wouldn't turn off. And there we are, all fixed. At least this is what fixed my video game system last week." He handed the tiny shrink ray back to Mr. Smith, then placed the magnifying glass and tweezers on the big desk. "All this tiny repair work made me hungry," said Leo as he headed out of the classroom. "Good luck on shrinking yourselves." "Thank you so much, Leo," shouted Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith as Leo waved goodbye and ran off to the cafeteria. Mr. Smith held the shrink ray in his hands and looked at Levi and Ivy. This was the moment they had been waiting for. After looking over the shrink ray for a bit, Mr. Smith finally spoke. "When I push the reverse button on the shrink ray, it will create a portal in front of us. It will look like a big glowing circle," began Mr. Smith. "When we walk through it, it should turn us all back to our normal sizes." "Should?" said Levi, sounding concerned. "I mean, Leo is really good at science and fixing video game systems," said Mr. Smith, "so I'm confident it will work." Levi and Ivy had no alternative, so they trusted Mr. Smith as they counted together. "Hey, friends, can we count down from 3 together? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Great job. At the count of 1, Mr. Smith pushed the reverse button and a glowing circular portal opened up before them. Mr. Smith told Levi and Ivy he would step through first to test it out. Then within seconds after stepping through the portal, Levi and Ivy were so excited to see Mr. Smith standing tall before them, back to his normal height. "It worked!" shouted Mr. Smith. "Come on through, Levi and Ivy." They held hands, closed their eyes, and counted down from 3 once more and walked through the glowing portal, which disappeared behind them once they were through. And thankfully, once they opened their eyes on the other side, they too were back to their normal heights. So happy to be back, they jumped up and down and ran around the classroom. "Thank you, Mr. Smith," said Levi. "That certainly wasn't a typical science class, but it definitely was the best." "Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Smith," said Ivy with a smile. "But if you'd like a little advice, I'd keep the shrink ray at home." "Great idea," said Mr. Smith with a laugh. "I don't know about you, but I'm pretty hungry after such a interesting morning. Let's head to the cafeteria and grab some food before your next class." And as they turned to walk out of the classroom, the school principal, Mrs. Binder, passed by the door. "Oh, there you all are," she said, stopping to talk. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Where did you run off to?" Replied Mr. Smith as he gathered his thoughts. "We just went on a little science trip to the school garden." "A very little trip," giggled Ivy to Levi. "Okay, but next time, Mr. Smith, please take your whole class," said Mrs. Binder as she continued down the hallway. Mrs. Smith just smiled at Levi and Ivy and said, "I don't think I'll be taking any more little trips to the school garden, at least not until I work on that shrink ray a lot more." They all agreed that that was the best idea as they left the classroom for the school cafeteria. Ivy, still with her magnifying glass and detective kit in hand, couldn't help but take a closer look at a little bumblebee as it buzzed by them in the hallway. It wasn't Floyd, but as she knew, they would all see him again soon. Once they arrived in the cafeteria, Mr. Smith took out the now normal-sized $21 bills and said he would be happy to buy Levi and Ivy anything they wanted for lunch after the morning they'd had. That's when Levi and Ivy noticed everyone around them enjoying a special drink. They waited in line, and as they got closer, they saw on a sign that the special drink of the day was honey lemonade. Because of the morning they had, nothing surprised them that day. They just smiled and each ordered a cup of cold, sweet lemonade. They also bought Leo a cup to say thank you before buying the rest of their lunch. Then Levi, Ivy, and Mr. Smith sat down to enjoy their honey lemonade as they ate their lunch and talked about their great mini adventure. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the story and learned a little something too.
And since we know everyone has their own story, we'd love to hear yours.
If you have an idea for a Lively Lewis story, leave a comment on our Apple Podcast review page with 5 stars, your idea, and your little one's name.
Then maybe our next adventure will be with you.
Until our next Storytime Hangout.
Thanks for listening. We can't wait to share another fun Lively Lewis story with you.